My name's Simon DeSonia. An individual therapist as well as a group and process facilitator. I'm currently completing my clinical masters in systemic family therapy. I've been working with organisations and teams and individuals the last 15 years or so. What I'd like to present to you today is on an overview on coherence therapy and the ideas that have underpinned this and its development, particularly around memory reconsolidation. Today I want to give just a brief summary of some general developments that are relevant around recent research of neuropsychology and neuroscience, and then to actually take us through the sequence of what we call the therapeutic reconsolidation framework. And we'll, along the way, use a case study of Jenny, who we'll meet, and a way to illuminate the sequence and some of the processes of coherence therapy. So, helping clients develop flexible and adaptive strategies for coping with everyday disappointment and unhelpful patterns and extraordinary disasters is the heart of the therapeutic process. And when we clinicians better understand how the brain works, we can help clients use the tools that will rewire and undo strategies that are defensive, dysfunctional, and blocking of growth, and even when they are stuck or otherwise intractable. We can then help them encode new and more flexible patterns of response for thriving and flourishing. This learning, growth, and healing can happen because the brain's innate neuroplasticity, that's the human brain's capacity to grow neurons, to create new connections among those neurons, to create new pathways and circuits lifelong, and thus create new learning and new and more skillful behaviours. All of this can be catalysed and sustained through the therapeutic process. Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby's recognition of attachment as an innate system switched on by threat invites us to consider again the primacy of affect, of what lies outside our awareness, requiring, even passionately compelling us into our behaviours, feelings, and cognitions. So they point us in doing this, they point us in a helpful direction. So 20 years of research and clinical experience from neuroscience of attachment pioneers like Alan Shaw, Dan Siegel, Louis Cozolino, and Bonnie Badenoch inform us that early attachment conditioning also kindles and shapes the maturation of the child's developing brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, our centre of executive functioning. And this develops the circuitry that helps the developing child to learn to regulate their own nervous system, to manage a broad range of emotions, and to quell the fear response of the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex integrates the brain's capacity for attunement, for empathy and awareness. Steve Porges' polyvagal theory sophisticates our understanding of why empathic attuned relationships work to create the safety and trust essential to increase the plasticity in the client's brain and increase the capacities for changed growth and healing. A warm, smiling face and low, slow tones calm the vagus and open us into the possibility of biorhythmic synchronies. These learnings confirm an approach to psychotherapy that emphasises the relational, the use of emotion and incline us toward the phenomenological. Memory reconsolidation. For 100 years, most mental health professionals believed that implicit memories, avoidance reactions, anxieties, and rigid schemas were locked permanently in the brain's synaptic pathways. And recent brain research shows that under certain conditions and within a brief time frame, we can not only unlock these neural pathways, but actually substitute new learning. What psychotherapy has added to the discoveries of the research lab is a range of experiential methods that make it possible for therapists to help clients move on from the past, allowing it to release its terrible grip on the present. In the last 2 decades, both behavioural scientists and neuroscientists have been validating the importance of positive resonant relationships to rewire the brain and develop skills of emotional, social, relational intelligence and resilience. Therapy is one of those privileged relationships that creates the conditions for rewiring the brain moment by moment in our therapeutic sessions. We might conceptualize the elements of the common factors theory to be the necessary foundation for these specific healing and growth preconditions. And as we consider those again, and we pay attention, I guess, to the work of people like Scott Miller and others who have identified that while the therapeutic alliance is maybe 40% of what we can determine is key to seeing change and shift in our clients, that the actual technique is much less important than a variety of other factors, including non-specific factors. In fact, at a conference only a couple of years ago on attachment and psychotherapy, I heard one of the speakers say this: just having an excuse to hang out long enough, safely enough, for the relationship to do the healing seems to me to be a helpful way also for us to think about it. Diana Fosher, who's the founder of the accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy approach, takes it even a little further and points us even more specifically at the relational. Since 2004, however, neuroscience has evidenced the specific experiential steps required to first unlock these emotional memories in the brain and then to permanently modify them or erase them altogether. So in 1995, Bruce Ecker and Laurel Hulley published on some years of work that they had done, looking back into their clinical cases where they had seen instances of actual shift in the sessions and using the empirical model of science to see what happened in those sessions just before that permanent shift took place. So what they found in the clinical lab matched what Bruce and Laurel had found here as a sequence of experience in their clinical observations based here and published in this book. They followed that up in 2013 with Unlocking the Emotional Brain, which I would recommend to you as if you're interested in this approach to look further into this. So what this work means is that not only is symptom relief without relapse now more predictable, we also have a good idea of how to elicit it methodologically here. in our clinical practice. So we'll just go forward a couple of pages here and maybe take us forward as well. Joe Ledoux is a US-based neuroscientist who was one of the first to publish on the memory reconsolidation, along with others in his staff, including Daniel Schiller. You can find more about them out on the web, on YouTube. There's a couple of clips as well, well worth having a look at. In this keynote from a recent conference in the States, 2013, he gives us a couple of minutes that are worthwhile paying attention to, useful for us. In this clip, he briefly talks about brain structure in a way that's very helpful. Let's continue on from here. Our memories, like ourselves, are subject to change. Thus, an acquired memory can become active and update its content or strength by a reconsolidation process. We move memories and memory traces effectively activated out of our long-term memory, bringing it back into short-term memory, reprocessing that, reconsolidating that, and again, returning it to longer-term memory. The brain's constantly encoding, consolidating, reconsolidating the features in the environment, this environment that we call memory. Plasticity and learning are key factors that operate, updating, and guide these representations and behaviours. This ability not only allows us, but also animals, to better adapt and prepare for present or future events, anticipating outcomes. To account for these phenomena, some authors propose the term predictive brain as the ability to make predictions based on stored information as a general coding strategy. And thus, in these terms, memory is flexible, malleable, and in a permanent state of construction and reconstruction. Surprise and mismatches produce an error in prediction between expected and current events and affect different stages of learning and memory. For decades, the prediction error was proposed as the process by which memories are acquired. And recently, within the memory reconsolidation framework, some evidence indicates that prediction error drives the updating of consolidated memories. Prediction error has a number of boundary conditions that can be defined, and that's what we have on screen here. And I guess what we're most interested in is to understand if it is that we largely understand the present through the constructions and felt sense and the way that we have understood the world is and that others are and I myself am. That understanding these boundary conditions to see memories become labile and available for change are actually incredibly important. Prediction error is proposed as a central component in the therapeutic reconsolidation framework, which is the name we have for this style of work as a kind of framework to understand this. And it's so useful to understand these boundary conditions for memory acquisition and reconsolidation to occur. Let's kind of now think a little bit more directly about what are the key steps of memory reconsolidation as it's played out through coherence therapy. And I'll put it to you, a number of other therapies, particularly those that are experiential, emotion-focused, and oriented towards the client's own experiencing. When we think about memory reconsolidation, there are 3 phases comprising 7 distinct steps that form the completed and successful therapeutic reconsolidation process following the work of Ecker, Hulley and Tisick, as documented and published there in Unlocking the Emotional Brain, 2013, building on their earlier work. And we're going to go into this to describe it using the case of an individual, someone who actually had a gambling problem. Okay, the first part of this is called the accessing sequence. So the first phase comprises 3 steps, and the first of these steps involves identifying the client's presenting symptom. In the second, the unconscious schemas producing the symptom are brought into the client's full consciousness and fixed into their everyday awareness. The third step involves identifying instances in the client's life that contradict or disconfirm or mismatch these unconscious schemas. So we'll go to the first step here, symptom identification. So Jenny is married and working, was in her early 30s and presented with a paralysing inability to stop her increasingly regular gambling and consequent deceptions at work and home, despite her conscious, desperate desire to do so. Jenny was drawing money against their family mortgage and had overdrawn and extended the credit card. And such was Jenny's despair at the situation that she was commencing to have suicidal thoughts. This inability to cease her gambling was Jenny's identified symptom, compulsive gambling. And the next step was to find out what in Jenny's implicit beliefs made this specific symptom so necessary. The next step, to retrieve the schema, to find the target learning here. In her first session, Jenny revealed that whenever she seriously tried to stop gambling or had someone come close to that topic, she was gripped by a deep fear and became both defensive and prone to angry outbursts. So the therapist began exploratory work into why this particular fear existed, knowing it would make coherent sense within at least one of Jenny's currently held but unconscious models of how the world works. And when he guided Jenny to experientially imagine that she'd actually stopped gambling, what began to emerge into her awareness was a powerfully held but previously unconscious belief that the world would be narrow, pointless and repetitive, without hope, somehow, without hope. Further exploration revealed that, as a child, Jenny had seen a slow, painful separation and divorce of her father and mother, due in part, at least, to their long hours and low-paid jobs. In her mind as a child, she came to believe that anyone who struggled financially without any possibility of relief was destined for a long, slow, painful decline into separation and despair. Wondering if there was a connection here, the therapist asked Jenny to describe the first time that she had ever gambled. Jenny recounted that she'd been to a party at a casino in her late teens. Many of the events had revolved around gambling, and she had won a jackpot. She had her first taste of what it was like to win real money. It was exhilarating, and it had felt like freedom. She'd started going to the casino now and then, and at first that had been enough. And soon, however, she had found herself going more regularly. And eventually, in more recent years, the thrill of a possible win had become all-consuming, and she'd started skipping out from work at odd times even so she could gamble during the day. It was hard for her to not have that frequently in mind, and nothing else mattered to her except for chasing this win, is how she expressed it. Sometimes she won, and these were the times that she prized and often recalled, even though she had a parallel awareness there to know that this was taking a toll. As she explored these memories with her therapist, it suddenly became clear to her that all along the gambling, the promise, or at least the chance of a win, had helped her to feel that she wouldn't wind up like her parents. She saw her mother die in particularly pitiful circumstances. A win at the casino would save her from her parents' fate of dying alone, penniless, miserable. It would fix everything. It would keep her safe. And now, even well into adulthood, the unconscious learning, the emotional truth or schema, was still compelling her to gamble. No matter how long ago such a schema was formed, if the rules of survival that it describes remain sealed away in the person's unconscious, these felt sense, emotional learnings continue to influence his or her perceptions of reality. Sealed off from conscious awareness, these remain impervious to disconfirming evidence in the here and now, and will continue to operate throughout a person's life, regardless of the symptoms they engender and even of the conscious wishes of the individual. And this is why discovering these unwritten rules of how the world works is a goal across all non-counteractive therapeutic modes. In Jenny's case, the therapist used a guided imagination exercise to uncover these rules, but he could have used numerous experiential techniques to reveal the same emotional truth. Person-centered counselling, Gestalt-type chair work, focusing, inner child or parts work, psychodrama methods, and many more. Indeed, the therapeutic reconsolidation process provides a central organising principle, a framework and rationale for why practitioners in one mode of psychotherapy may wish to borrow techniques from multiple other modes of psychotherapy. This therapeutic reconsolidation process is the central mechanism of change that all of these approaches share, and they all aim to facilitate. Whether or not they know this language, have this framework consciously in mind, it seems that retrospectively you can see these same steps taking place in a variety of effective therapies. In fact, in the Unlocking the Emotional Brain book, there are a number of case studies from different therapies where transcripts have been analysed to be able to recognise the elements of this approach. So with Jenny now conscious of the schema producing her symptom, the next task was to root this in everyday awareness so it would be available to be modified or erased permanently in the next phase, the transformation phase. And to this end, the therapist and client together crafted a statement for Jenny to say out loud that articulated her newly discovered emotional truth. And it goes like this: if I stop gambling and cut off my chances for an instant win, I'll die like mum, pointless and poor and angry. And actually getting Jenny to say that out loud had Jenny say, consequently, that felt strange to verbalise this previously unconscious knowing, but it also felt emotionally true and real in some way. She was, for the first time here, explicitly articulating her non-verbal implicit memory belief. To strengthen and deepen this newly formed connection between her implicit and explicit memory, the therapist sent Jenny's statement by SMS each day. It's an application that you can run on a phone that would just set up and be firing that at a certain time each day. So it pushes it toward the client, a little more effective than just giving them a card and asking them to stay in touch with it or read it. But either of those can work, certainly. So the therapist sent this message here by SMS each day, so Jenny could read it and emotionally stay in touch with it and re-experience it daily over the coming week. And the aim of this between session task is to maintain her awareness of the emotional truth that produced her symptom, not to override that truth. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Statements from Carl Jung, and it seems to point directly toward the ownership of what was previously outside of awareness and yet somehow feels true when spoken in the first person and owned in such a process. So the first step in this direction for Jenny was to note explicitly this just as I am, what this really constitutes for her. The next step here is identifying the disconfirming knowledge, here our step C on the slide. So once the previously unconscious and symptom generating material has been successfully integrated into conscious awareness, the next stage is to permanently transform or erase it. This is achieved through finding a here and now emotional reality that specifically disconfirms the unconscious version of reality. In Jenny's case, the actual truth of her gambling and of the impacts on her partner Peter and her family could not have been more different to the version of reality she had previously stored unconsciously. Peter was a committed secondary school teacher, and he was now taking on extra tutoring to make sufficient money to keep the household afloat. The last win which Jenny had had was in the previous year, and money was scarce. There was a lot of tension in this household. In complete contrast to that time, both the explicit and implicit messages from Peter were that Jenny was sinking their relationship and the family and condemning them to live in poverty and pointlessly without hope. With Jenny now fully conscious of both her symptom-generating version of reality and a current contradictory version of reality, the conditions were in place for the transformation sequence. At the heart of this second phase of therapeutic reconsolidation process is the core discovery that when previously unconscious schemas are brought into routine consciousness and repeatedly shown to be at variance with reality, this is our prediction error, remember this, the synapses holding that model in place can be permanently modified or even erased altogether, is what some people would say. And importantly, though, just to note, autobiographical memory remains intact. What we're talking about losing or changing a relationship to is the emotional load, the affect corollary that's associated with that memory trace. And again, this sequence consists of 3 steps. So the first step is the reactivation of the symptom requiring schema. For Jenny, this first step occurred easily whenever her attention was guided back to the statement that encapsulated the emotional truth of this schema. If I stop gambling and cut off the likelihood of instant winning, I will die like mum, pointless and poor and angry. The second, next step, is the activation of disconfirming knowledge, challenging the version of reality that had previously been unconscious. And this step was inherent in Jenny's felt knowledge of their family's actual situation now. And so, again, a visualization kind of that was gently but very richly kind of fostered here, saw her to visualize Peter surrounded by bills, sick with worry, the house unkempt, the two of them arguing and escalating kind of disagreement and yelling, their child crying, worried, unattended during this fight. In every way, her daily experience here contradicted the version of reality held in her symptom-requiring schema. And the final step of the transformation sequence simply involves the bumping together or experiential juxtaposition of the old, previously unconscious version of reality with the disconfirming reality of the here and now. In practice, the therapist guides the client's attention back and forth between the versions to repeatedly foster their meeting as it were, they're occupying the same arena of consciousness in a way that they otherwise would never do. The therapist continues to facilitate this process until sufficient mismatched experiences have occurred to permanently dissolve the previously unconscious version of reality. Although in approximately half of cases, this process begins to happen unconsciously when the previously out of awareness material is brought into stable everyday awareness. Neuroscience shows us that it is through this prediction error, a repeated bumping together in the same field of awareness, that the thick encoding of the old learning is replaced by the synaptic encoding of new learnings. In Jenny's case, the therapist facilitated this process by simply, gently, and persistently activating her current emotionally true expectation. Only when Jenny is fully feeling the truth of that does the therapist want to experientially draw her attention to these other aspects of her experience. So for instance, it might go something like this. Yes, and from this place, knowing what you know about how crucially important it is to maintain the possibility of getting a win, I want you to look over to the side at the scene of your house in shambles as you described it the other day, and to see again, is Peter all stressed, your child in tears, you're arguing, and in the middle of this, you're going to pause and tell them what you know to be true. Tell them, I have to keep open the possibility of a win. It's the only way to make sure that I don't die pointless and poor and angry like Mum did. Making this statement in the face of such a mountain of incongruous evidence requires Jenny to hold the two mismatching versions of reality. That is, a reality felt to be emotionally resonant and true. And she's holding these two mismatching versions of reality simultaneously in her full conscious awareness. Her mind will be challenged to hold these two incompatible versions of reality simultaneously. And she'll feel the pressure to resolve the situation by moving toward the version of reality that she knows actually to be more true. And as it were, from an evolutionary perspective, what we're talking about here is a better fit for purpose or a more adaptive response. From the therapist's perspective, there are a number of physiological tells or markers of change that we might look out for when we're leading the juxtaposition experience. We might look for changes in blood flow expressed there in the colour of the face or the neck, blinking of the eyes, temporary dizziness, maybe even a kind of discomforted laughter. There are a number of reliable signs which we might look for that would indicate that the juxtaposition or the mismatching is taking place and that neurologically there's something happening. It's important to note that merely bringing these knowings as cognitive insight into conscious awareness as part of a logical sequence is not enough to launch the reconsolidation process. The client will not change and symptom production will continue unless the client concurrently experiences a disconfirming version of reality in their consciousness, in a vivid and lived emotional awareness, in the felt sense of the truth of this. And this can occur spontaneously in session or between session, guided by the therapist, or simply met by real life taking its moment as people sensitized to this larger reality very often meet in their own day-to-day the mismatch of those emotional truths. The final step is verification. So the therapeutic reconsolidation process permanently dissolves the earlier emotional knowings responsible for symptom production. So relapse cannot occur. One way that we might want to think about this way of working is to say that we respect the symptom, but in fact what we want to change are the emotional truths or schemas that are compelling, requiring that behaviour or feeling or belief or cognition. That we're actually seeking to see the symptom cease as a proof of the fact that we have dissolved the emotional schema that was at play. Obviously, there can be more than one emotional schema requiring certain behaviour. Verification involves actively probing for key markers that the process is complete, and this can be observed in the client's self-reports and way of being, but actively we would want to do this in session. If we have time, we would do it toward, obviously, post-juxtaposition. Verification involves a further degree of experiential prompting. For example, if the client reports a number of changes that indicate that transformation has likely occurred, the therapist verifies that by having her reimagine those scenarios while making an overt statement of the original emotionally true knowing and trying it. In this case, what we got from Jenny was her saying, "It seems daft to me now that I felt so convinced that I could magic think my way to a better life." And when the client laughs and say how ridiculous that now sounds, this is further evidences toward our assumption that transformation has occurred. By the end of her work with the therapist, Jenny reported that the previously compelling emotional truth sent to her each day on the SMS was now implausible. The result of this construct dissolution is a fundamental change in one's experience and perception of the world. Something that seemed self-evidently true about the world, unquestionable even, no longer seems true at all. The therapist further checks here for emotional reactivation by inviting Jenny to deeply, vividly imagine she was walking up to the usual gambling rooms and to check what her internal experience of that was. This time, Jenny had the knowledge of the gambling and could feel a little bit of the pull and anticipation of what she described as a kind of exciting, narrowing focus. But she was to report to the therapist here any part of her that felt drawn in toward this prospect. And Jenny was unable to identify any strong anticipation of thrill or familiar numbing, and instead said that she found herself feeling confused, like watching a movie of someone else, but seeing the movie, the person looked like her, but somehow also a stranger. Her final words was, "I guess that was then." So aside from the therapist having deliberately reactivated the emotionally true material at the start of this process, Jenny's reading and re-experiencing of the emotional truth written on the either the index card or the SMS message that's forwarded to her while she was experiencing the contrasting current reality of her life with Peter, added and sort of softened, pre-warmed, if you like, the availability and potency of the mismatch between these experiences. By the close of the work with Jenny, which spanned 8 sessions over 11 weeks, Jenny and Peter had commenced a couple and financial counselling, and Jenny had been able for the first time to start a savings plan. She also reported feeling more able to tolerate tension over money and discussions about money at home. When the therapist talked to Jenny 6 months later, she reported a cessation of her initial symptom, the symptom of compulsive gambling reinforced by fear and anger when deprived of that. And she also reported that her and Peter were holding to the savings plan with occasional lapses, but significantly holding to it. Further inquiry confirmed her old symptoms had in no way reoccurred since the work ended, even during periods of stress. And here's a very important thing, again, a quality that we would look for to confirm transformation of that emotional construct. It was that she's making no additional effort at all to stop or to keep herself from the gambling. This is the most reliable tell of all. Okay, so to recap here, memory reconsolidation is a neurological process that allows existing emotional learning or conditioning to be modified. The key thing to understand about juxtaposition, that's the kind of final kind of transformation sequence, the second of those 3 steps here, is that it means getting the client fully in touch with and not away from the symptom requiring material. And then, while directly in touch with it, to get in touch also with the contradictory knowledge. It's not a heady talking about. It's being in and under the experience in the emotional truth of each of those positions. Heading the client towards and putting the client in touch with the very stuff that's causing all the trouble is actually counterintuitive for most therapists. And for some indeed, there's a level of discomfort in going toward it on behalf of the client. Ecker and Hulley's studies of their clients led them to conclude that for virtually any clients presenting symptoms, there's an unconscious but findable emotional schema requiring that symptom to exist. And secondly, the profound and lasting change in the symptom occurs by transforming that schema through submitting it to a juxtaposition experience. A mismatch, a prediction error is what we're seeking to foster. In other words, a juxtaposition with any other living knowledge that's incompatible with that schema. And incompatible has to mean both cannot possibly be true. The clinical strategy of coherence therapy is designed to do exactly that in an efficient manner. And of course, there are other experiential focused therapies which do this exactly as well. But I put it to you that this is a particularly focused and effective way to work briefly and deeply with your client. So the first thing we have to do here is to find the symptom requiring schema. This is what we call the discovery work. Then you have to steep the client in the direct emotional experience of it. And that is what we call the integration work. And then after that, after this keeping both unconscious and disconfirming knowings in a full emotional awareness, it's time for transformation through juxtaposition or mismatch, prediction error. The finding, steeping, and transforming each have their own well-defined steps within coherence therapy, and together they are the entire methodology. But it's by no means a cookie-cutter approach. All of this has to be tailored skillfully to each client, tailoring the therapist's style of interaction, the techniques used, and the pace of the work to the client's material and presentation. And within all of that, the therapist has tremendous latitude. If working experientially is of interest to you, it's already something that you're doing, is something that you want to get better at. You may well be interested in some training or workshop that will be offered early into 2017, and contact information will be provided here in the notes below as well. I'll hand out make available the slides here, and you'll be able to see also a couple of others and some references to some online material that's worthwhile looking at as well. Together with Niall Gagan, who's a US-based therapist, psychologist, that he and I have put together some training materials. They're available to be seen online. There's a 90-minute video training that's for free, and there's other materials that are out there on the web as well, and they'll provide some links to those. Thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you possibly at a training or another seminar. Thanks for watching.